Welcome to My on Mondays, an explorative approach to the possessive my through narratives, art, and sound. Each Monday brings a new creation and unique perspective. My on Mondays is brought to you by MING Studios, a contemporary art space and international artist residency program dedicated to the exhibition, experience, and exploration of arts and culture. Along with exhibiting artists from around the world, MING also serves the community by hosting innovative programs including performances, workshops, screenings, readings, artist talks, and other cultural activities. For more information, or if you'd like to participate in My on Mondays, you can visit our website at mingstudios.org. Hello and welcome to the 48th episode of My on Mondays. Today I'm speaking with Kevin Carroll, a musician and music educator based in Austin, Texas. Kevin's musical trajectory has taken him through years performing with his own band, the Sleestacks, as well as touring nationally and internationally with Jimmy LaFave and Charlie Robison, with 2 appearances on Austin City Limits. In our conversation, he tells us of his early experiences and feelings about music, life as a touring musician, and the serendipitous circumstance that led him away from the guitar scene into the very different and surprising world of the ukulele. I think what I would like to start with is, before we get into the sort of nuts and bolts of your career, I was reading the newspaper article that you have on your website, and you mention at one point that growing up, you had such a reverence for music that you felt like you had to be chosen to do it.
Yeah.
And which I thought was really interesting. And so you felt like you had to be this special person, and maybe you felt like you weren't worthy. Where do you think that idea came from?
Oh man, I just always loved music, and I know I was like so many toddlers and stuff. I was like a dancer all the time, dancing.
Mm.
About it, I have no memory of it, but I remember like one moment when I felt like, oh, this is like what a musician should be like. And it
Mm.
was watching Sesame Street, and I caught that, in the first incarnation, and
Mm-hmm.
seeing Stevie Wonder play Superstition
Oh,
when I was
wow.
about 6 years old, and go, oh, well, yeah, I'm never going to do that.
Mm.
But I would watch it every day. And I just think that it's hard to pinpoint it. It's not like my parents liked music, but it wasn't like they loved music in that way. I would probably have to do some deeper analysis,
Mm-hmm.
to really unlock that. But I guess, this would be an odd way to answer it, but I think maybe on some cellular level, I knew that was my calling,
Mm.
and
Mm.
that it's one that I've fought for, and one that I've tried to serve as well as I can most of my life, and I notice it's the thing that I get into conflict most in that world, is feeling like somebody's not as dedicated to the music as they could
Mm.
be.
Mm.
Really bums me out, and it's a problem,
In what
regardless
way?
of
You
talent
mean
level.
in the professional world?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, as a player, um, and I think it's maybe just my nature. I think there's pros and cons to it, but I'm kind of an all or nothing, all in kind of
Mm-hmm.
person. And I just was, made a commitment early to music. And I felt like a lot of times, I've certainly met a lot of people with a lot more talent, a lot more knowledge, a lot more skill, but haven't met many that have worked harder or that were more dedicated to
Hmm.
it in the path. And yeah, I guess I see it as a vocation. I I never really saw it as a profession per
Mm-hmm.
se. I mean, I knew it's what I wanted to do, but to do music um, requires a lot of, as you would know, I think, um, nomadic tendencies and ability to sacrifice some basic things that a lot of folks aren't willing to sacrifice,
Yeah. Yeah.
in day-to-day stability and all that. And I remember talking to my friend who's a, professional musician, producer, and all of this. And I remember him calling me one time, like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I've just been working on this Lindsey Buckingham guitar part for like 4 hours." And him, being a guitar player and stuff, it's like, "Oh, I've never worked on one thing for 4 hours in my life."
What?
Um, but
Wow.
just having that, the details of it and wanting to
Mm-hmm.
honor it,
Mm-hmm.
the purity of the sound, and this I could even go more ethereal in the thing I've been thinking about a lot about music that I hadn't really thought of. It's just the thing I loved and was attracted to, is that it happens in the air and
Mm-hmm.
in our heads,
Mm-hmm.
and and it can stay in our heads, but in the air, it's gone as soon as you hear it.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of anything more mysterious. But yeah, that's probably the longest possible answer to that question.
It's great. Well, I mean, it was a sort of complex question, I suppose. So you were involved for a long time just in the professional music scene, and you had this really deep reverence for music in general and with what you wanted to do and where you wanted to go with it. Can you tell me a little bit about the professional music scene in Austin and some of the things that you were dealing with, both the good and the bad?
Yeah. Well, luckily, I've forgotten so much because I think this could be like a 16-hour answer. But yeah, so many of the good things. For one, there's a ton of songwriters here, and
Mm-hmm.
there was a real roots scene, and there's a lot of good guitar players here, for sure. And really, it's kind of like the songwriters and guitar players. Kind of hotbed, especially in the late 80s and through the 90s, maybe even across the border of 2000. And that was great, and made, a lot of friends, and continued to do really what my life's mission is personally, which is just to learn and
Mm-hmm.
learn as much about music and immerse myself in it. I also ended up, getting a record deal here, doing some really cool gigs, and then
And you
also
were
ended up
you were
yeah.
you appeared on Austin City Limits as
I've done that
well.
a couple times,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, yeah, then ended up playing guitar. I learned so much from all the great guitar players that played in my band over the
Mm-hmm.
years, and just watching players. But then eventually got a gig with this guy Charlie Robison, and it was crazy. The first gig we played to 12 people in Denton, but they weren't all there at the same time. And the one of the highlights was playing a sold out show at the Cotton Bowl with, I don't know, 40,000. And
Wow.
then, yeah, doing Austin City Limits a couple times. He was on a major label, and so I got
Mm-hmm.
to do that whole thing.
Yeah.
That that used to be the thing, and maybe it still is, but be on a tour bus.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think I did one year, I think more than 250 gigs in a year on the road.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
And yeah, and I think if my math is correct, I played about 1,800 shows in a decade with Charlie Robison.
Okay.
And so, yeah, and that was great, and that was certainly one of those things. We used to watch Austin City Limits every night. It was like way in the back of my mind, like, oh, that'd be cool. I would know I've made it if I was on that show. And it was so funny, because it's just like Charlie and I afterwards, it was like, I think like this limit, that we'd both set. And I remember talking to him, it's like, what do you do now? Kind of blew our minds a little bit. You really have to recalibrate. But yeah, and did that and played also some with his brother, Bruce Robison, and his sister, Robin Ludwig, all of whom were phenomenal, gifted songwriters, and done, various other things from blues and roots kind of music with guitar over the years.
And so I know at a certain point you began to feel sort of disillusioned with the professional music scene. I don't know if this is just in Austin or just in general, but you had some pretty bad experiences.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right. You asked the good and the bad. Yeah. So the flip side of that coin, I luckily had dealt with my alcohol issues before I even moved to Austin. So that wasn't a problem. But the living situation I had, lived in this $200 a month place with no AC, and that was horrible. I also had some, I think just being a highly sensitive person, I think I had my wake-up call, my nervous breakdown / breakthrough when we went to Iraq in 2007.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I just went into like severe panic like a couple days before we left. And I remember picking up this magazine, and it led me to this whole other thing, but some really cool young Buddhist monk had these meditation techniques and approaches, and it was all about panic, and it changed my life. But I'd realized, I guess, that if I went to Iraq, I wasn't in support of that war. And number two, I realized I wasn't in alignment with the values of the music I would be playing over there. And so that was a wake-up call, and I said, I gotta get right with music. And I quit that gig, and I wanted out of this. I decided to make a really sharp turn to, I just wanted to give more than I felt that there was an element of taking that I was doing in the life I was living, and that those I was with were doing. And I wanted to do more giving. Yeah. And so went toward education, and also finally got my shoulder repaired. Needed, it was like everything that could go wrong with the shoulder was wrong, and so I had surgery.
And so that affected your playing, of course.
It's funny that I'm just kind of like, I wonder if I had surgery 10 years earlier, what my career would have looked like, or what my playing would have sounded like. Because it is remarkable to me in that that I did it, because this is a severe injury on my right shoulder. But it also showed me how much I was willing to sacrifice in the name of music. And I was like, wow, this guy's not messing around. He's really playing through a lot of pain and dysfunction, physical dysfunction. And then I met this PT, phenomenal practitioner, and he asked, said, I think I can get you ready for this tour you got in 6 months, right after I had surgery. And he said, you want to do a trade? And I'm like, sure. And he's like, my daughter just got a ukulele. Can you teach her? And I inside I'm going, oh, ukulele. I don't really like the ukulele. And also going, I've never quite figured out even how to tune these things, And then externally just saying, of course, I would love to, and remember buying a ukulele at South Austin Music, and I was on painkillers in a sling, and I quickly noticed about a little concert, Lanakai ukulele, and it was like, oh, I could actually kind of play this like right now, like 2 weeks after shoulder surgery, and after but within a year, I think I just said, I think I'm gonna cash in all my chips and go all in with the ukulele.
So
And
what
I did.
spurred that transition, though? I mean, because you're going from I don't like the ukulele. It had to have been more than just oh, I can physically play it.
There's a few steps in between there. So I started studying like a lot of ukulele forums, and I started, I think, kind of just reading the cosmology of the people that were on it, and noticed that people were really generous, really friendly. And I don't know if you've spent any time on an electric guitar forum, and actually there's some of them pretty good, but I didn't find the guitar world to be the most generous, open.
One of the questions I was going to ask you was, what is the difference between ukulele people and guitar people?
Well, yeah. I know, and I could put myself in this category, but I think that I could have chosen a lot of instruments, but I chose the guitar in part, like a lot of, I think, probably highly sensitive and maybe socially awkward young males do, because I just didn't know how to relate to people. And like in a room, I would go, oh, the safest place would be like right behind that guitar on stage, and be like, oh, that's where I should be, and that was part of the motivation. And I think I've noticed that some people choose that because it has this built-in mythology, or it did, and it may be getting healthier now. That a lot goes along with being a guitar player, and I think it's attractive to a lot of guys, especially in the sense that, oh, this is gonna compensate for my weaknesses or whatever, and make me, this is gonna be the thing, it's gonna make me bigger and better. But I don't yet know anyone who would look at a ukulele and say, oh, this is it. This is how I'm going to, take over the world with the ukulele. It's like, it's so easy to underestimate. And it's a new instrument, so that there isn't this collective unconscious kind of data around it. It was created in the 1880s, and so it's like a brand new instrument, and there's still not a right way or wrong way, and we're figuring it out, what you can do with it, what you can't. And the thing that I really love about it, it's like a weird combination between like neuroscience and spirituality, is like if I do a ukulele show, people's minds are just completely blank, or they have their own weird little ideas of what it is, and then that's quickly wiped out. So I get to play with people's expectations, and that is so much fun, because they almost couldn't be lower. If I showed up with a cello or something, people expect a certain thing, or even a guitar. And I remember the first time I got on stage with the ukulele, a friend of mine, invited me to come out to this cool place, and they had a really cool, funky, rootsy band with percussion, guitar, and harmonica. And I get up there, it's like Friday night, and they call me up, and I get there, and I literally played one chord in tune, the first chord, and people started yelling and clapping. And then I'm just like, oh boy, this is gonna be good. Like, okay, if they like just, and who in their right mind, if you go up with a guitar and play a chord, and people are like, oh my gosh, that's like an instrument, wow, it's in key and everything. But and then I ended up playing slide ukulele and then all this stuff, and people's minds were blown, but it's super, super fun. um, to play with that, and
Yeah.
I would say my path with the ukulele was unbelievably fortunate. And I had one great teacher, a guy named Gordon Rowland, just for a few months when I first started. He's a classical player and teacher, but I never really encountered a teacher until the ukulele, and
Mm-hmm.
found a guy named Kimo Hussey, who's just a Hawaiian ukulele master, and then enrolled in this program with a guy named James Hill in Canada, who's the best teacher of anything I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And a guy who's like 17 years younger than me, which
Mm-hmm.
is an interesting thing to have a younger mentor.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, I learned more in 3 years and made more friends in 3 years on the ukulele than I did in 30 years on guitar.
Do you think that is just because of the type of person that tends to play ukulele? Like, I'm getting a sense that there is this feeling of openness with the
Definitely.
instrument.
It seems like it. And there's a lot of baby boomers that are lifetime learners. They got nothing to prove. They
Mm-hmm.
got nothing to lose. So there's a different sense there. Also, I think that there's a lot of people who are kind of givers in the uke
Mm-hmm.
world, and it's funny. I think also, personally, it's probably a thing where, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And I think that was the case for me as a
Yeah.
student.
Yeah.
And then I'm trying to pay that back, by being that teacher for as
Mm-hmm.
many people as I can, and just opening up the beauty of music. But it's a beautiful instrument, and it's the volume level being so low, you can really practice
Mm-hmm.
anytime, anywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
not worry about a divorce or being disowned, or calling the police or anything. Um, that electric guitar players, kind of have to worry about. And the portability of it's been great. But like, tonally, I have a little ukulele orchestra, and it's remarkable to be in like an acoustically sound, intimate room
Mm-hmm.
with that instrument, because the dynamic ceiling is so low, as is the dynamic floor there. But it really does something to you as a listener, where it opens you up to listening at a volume that you just never hear music at.
Mm-hmm.
Like a really noisy room, and people just start yelling, "Hey, everybody!" And then there's that one person that's like, "Hey, everybody," and you just like, "Okay,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, uh huh." That quiet voice that is like, "Oh, that's more serious
Mm-hmm.
than the yelling voice." And I think the ukulele kind of registers in that way sometimes.
Yeah, it reminds me, a friend of mine who lived in Japan for a number of years was talking about, I don't know if this is still a thing there, but this friend was telling me about the gardens there, and he had built in his home when he moved back to the States, a similar sort of Japanese style garden. And he mentioned that they tend to have these archways that are kind of low, or entryways into gardens, so that you actually have to bend down. And when you do that, your perspective automatically shifts, and you're seeing the garden or the world or whatever, in a new way. And it seems like the ukulele kind of does that the same. By you have to shift your way of listening.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's a great metaphor for it. Yeah, the sonic equivalent of
Mm-hmm.
that. Yeah, and I've had a lot of hearing loss from ride cymbals and guitar amps and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so with this ukulele orchestra, the Austin Ukestra, it's called. I've ended up being a conductor, an arranger, composer,
Mm-hmm.
and leading that in a way that I'd never imagined
Mm-hmm.
doing in my life. But from that place of being like in front of the horseshoe of musicians, I'm amazed at the subtlety of hearing that
Mm-hmm.
I have, even with hearing loss.
Mm-hmm.
And that if somebody changes strings, one player out of like 16, 12 or 16, however many, um, the whole thing sounds different to me.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody gets a new uke and it's like, oh, the whole thing, the music has changed. And there's also something about the power of things in miniature. And I've never
Mm-hmm.
been one of those like miniaturized kind of people. I've got friends and know people that just love little things,
Uh-huh.
the small versions of stuff. But one thing I noticed compared to being kind of a semi guitar geek, paying attention to like wood types and
Mm-hmm.
characteristics of cedar and rosewood and spruce and whatnot,
Mm-hmm.
and noticing how much of a difference that makes on a guitar,
Yeah.
and 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 just figuring, well, a guitar's this big, uke is this big, it's going to be, like 20%, 30% difference on a ukulele. It is like 400%
Hmm.
difference on a ukulele. You really hear the tone of the woods. You
Wow,
really hear the
interesting.
bracing style, and that's another element of this that is really beautiful and vibrant. Is that there are just some of the best luthiers in the world are making ukuleles, and I'm lucky enough to have some really amazing hand-built instruments, and have more on order. But the major manufacturers are supplying the general public, but the real aficionados and the pros find these outlying individual makers, and I think that that's a huge part of the growth of the instrument and the credibility of it,
Mm-hmm.
because so you can just pick these instruments, you just immediately think, oh wow, this is a special instrument, and yeah, it's been quite an education in that way, and it's really cool to get. It's helped me as a musician to cultivate these relationships with luthiers, because I've just
Mm-hmm.
learned so much more about the differences and what my tendencies are, what I like, and I've always been one that I've felt that instruments have a lot to teach the player,
Yeah.
and it's a fun journey. And every once in a while, you need some new lessons, and you need a new instrument to get those new lessons sometimes.
One of the things I wanted to ask was about your music itself. It seems like you're known for being a sort of revolutionary or unique uke player. Can you tell us about the music that you play and teach?
That sounds like a very generous description, but yeah. So this is the non-musical answer, but I never really succeeded too much at doing anything above just surviving in
Hmm.
life, and I hit an age where I was like, I would like to maybe have some stuff, like insurance and a front door that worked properly, and those kinds of things, and started kind of studying, and then realized, hey, I'm going into business. I don't know anything about business. I should learn a little bit about that. But I think that I may even have it wrong, but I think the book I read was something about like blue ocean strategy, but it seemed to really resonate with just who I am, because it was like there's these areas that are just shark infested and everybody's swimming in, and
Mm-hmm.
if you go kind of beyond the horizon, you're like the only person operating, and that is a really great place to be. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and I think musically I love space, and I think as a creator and as a business person, I'm just much more comfortable, creating like I'm doing right now, like a jazz ukulele course or
Mm-hmm.
African music, Celtic music and not, saying, hey, let's play Riptide. I'm just not that guy. And so I'm naturally attracted to those edges of things. And I find just as a human being, when I am learning something, there's something really vibrant happening between me and life and the world. And it makes me, as long as I'm just ahead enough of the learning curve of my students, it makes it real in a cool way. And that I notice too, once I've taught something 5 or 6 times, it's kind of like time to move on. I'm just not a set it and forget it or a systems type person, but I just go toward what sparks me. But one major difference with the ukulele, than the guitar for me, is that I learned to read music, just about 10 years ago. And so now I compose on the staff more than on the instrument. And I compose for multiple instruments and multiple voices. And that's so much fun. And I oftentimes will learn a concept, or, like I read the book on counterpoint, that Mozart's dad read, from 1600s or something. And went through it, did all the exercises, and it took forever. But I always loved counterpoint and didn't really understand it. And then naturally it creeps, I have like some tune. It's kind of like Japanese trip hop with a kodo, except it's on ukulele. And it's like, well, what would Handel create, like, as the fourth part here, and
I can't even imagine what that sounds like.
Well, if I were going to plug anything, it would be my new website, EdUkecation.com. And we could talk about that later, but that you could hear it in its entirety there. It's been an interesting thing. Like, I think if you're a songwriter, you pick up your instrument and you start playing, or maybe you record some stuff on a computer or whatever, or get some loops. But I think I'm more of a composer, and kind of writing one line and then having it talk to another line, and coming up with melodies, harmonies, and just how it all works. I just love that process. And I thank James Hill for creating the ukulele in the classroom thing, because that's how I learned. When I went through I learned 90 songs in that program and countless others since. But that gave me an entire, it just opened up, I think, another half of my brain that I wasn't using for music. And so I think that's been a positive.
That's a really interesting point. The podcast last week was on language, which does kind of a similar thing when you're learning a new language, and music could be described that way, especially if you're going from, someone who plays by ear and then learning to read music and write music on the actual staff. It's a completely different skill. And that brings me to my next question. I know you have started a new business where you're now creating sheet music for ukulele players, and you've already written a number of books.
Yes, indeed. Again, something else I never envisioned myself doing, either of those things. But the first book I wrote was a Celtic ukulele Kaylee. I just couldn't resist trying to rhyme those two words. Very different cultures. And I'll admit, that there's something about the almost perversity of playing traditional Celtic music on a Hawaiian instrument. I don't know. It attracted me. But yeah, and then the books I wrote after that have been ensemble-based books. And there's I think it's one of the most harmonious, beautiful things. You just see a group of people get together and play music. There's some people that want to play all the parts themselves or just be a soloist or just strum, others that just want to strum and sing. But then there's others that are like, my favorite time of music was high school band. I just love that, I played my silly little trombone part. It sounded weird by itself, and it sounded great, with the whole thing.
There is something about playing with a group of musicians or singing, in a choir, that it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. And so, inspired a little bit by even like the what was called like parlor music in the 1800s and stuff. Just people playing tunes. But I also wanted to learn how to arrange, and so I wrote 3 books. I think each one of them has 7 songs in like 4 parts, and I also included bass with those because it just anchors. It makes it sound like an orchestra to have that lower octave.
Is there a bass ukulele?
Yes.
Or is it?
There is.
Okay.
And, oh my gosh, and if anybody's listening and it says, "Oh, I've been playing upright forever. I'm getting a little old and tired of carrying this thing around," or I have an electric bass and I have a giant amp. This Kala makes a thing called a U bass, which is weighs about 1.5 pounds and is the size of a baritone guitar, and it doesn't go quite as high as an upright bass, but it goes as low as an upright bass.
Oh, cool.
And amazing tone. And yeah, I can never stop playing that, and it's just so much fun. But the parts could easily be played on an upright or electric bass, fretless or fretted. And,
Okay.
yeah. And sometimes I include baritone, which is like the viola, I think of it. In that it's in between the bass or the cello and the violin, But then most of it is, ukulele, and it's been so much fun creating this new site. It's also been, an adventure, and been a lot of challenges in the process. And if the pandemic hadn't happened, I never would have done it. And so in that way, I'm really grateful that I just gutted it out and did this. Right now, I think I just put the 170th song on this site. It's called EdUkecation, EdUkecation.com.
Of course.
And you can, this is another thing I noticed about the uke world. They love puns. Anything with it. Uke is such a great word to get in things. But I've got music, a lot of classical music. That's been another discovery through the ukulele that has been amazing to me. I just love classical music. And it's like have a natural feel for certain types of it, and that was a shock to me. And there's Celtic music. I've done some of my own compositions, some of which I've explored, like I mentioned before, but like some Japanese koto kind of stuff, because I feel like there's a timbre and a tone that's similar there between the two instruments. And there's blues, there's jazz, there's African music. If I had one complaint about the uke world as I know it, is it's a very white world. And there is a lot of music that just never gets, that it doesn't play. And I'm really gravitating toward both African American and African music types, especially Mali, because they have a cool stringed instrument history there, and it's just, the music is just so
That's phenomenal.
impactful. And again, who's doing that? So that attracts me, in that way. Though I'm sure I could, make more money, if I was just doing like the music of Taylor Swift or something. But this is where my heart is.
Yeah.
And so the way the site works, which is, God, we put so much work into this, is that all of the songs are available in tablature.
And
All
for
the parts are available.
for non-musicians,
Yeah.
the tablature is sort of, how would you describe tablature? Sort of like a code for people who don't read music?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just tells you the string, which string and which fret to play, and also standard musical notation. And then we decided there were those people who said, well, I really like to see both at the same time. And so you get all three of those. And you can buy either an entire song, which would include all the parts, including a conductor score, or you can just buy individual parts. It's kind of graded by level, or searchable by level. It's also searchable by composer, by era, by region. There's a lot to it, and you can hear every arrangement in its entirety on the site. And it's both amazed and mortified me when I in kind of putting this all together. Once we finally got it up and going, I just thought, I'm going to add up all the measures of music that are on the site when it launched, and oh my Lord, I figured, God, I bet there's 10,000 measures of music on here. And when I added it up, there were over 11 million measures of
That's
music.
insane. Wow.
It is insane, yeah. And that was what I was like, I don't even remember doing half of these arrangements, 11 million. When did I do that? Because I individually figured out the tablature, which means there's a lot of ways that you could finger these songs, or how that moves. And so that alone, for especially beginner or intermediate players, could be a huge benefit. Having like somebody has already thought about this and figured this out for you, and here's one possible way to play it. But yeah, it's something that I can see now too. It's kind of a project of a lifetime, and one that I'm hoping that I'll be able to continue adding to for the rest of my life, and it can benefit a lot of people. It makes me happy to think that somebody somewhere is making some music that they couldn't have made before this site existed, and it makes me feel good.
Yeah, that's a lovely sentiment. Well, thank you so much for your insights and for sharing your particular journey, which is very particular. I feel like in the music world, it's really unique, and I've found it really interesting to hear what you have to say about it. So thank you so much for agreeing to talk with me today.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for having me. And thanks for doing all this research and keeping so much alive with whatever number I am, 48, 49, 50 in your series. And I think it's a wonderful thing for people to get deeper access into the music.